The Victorians were fascinated by crime, and Sherlock Holmes fed an insatiable appetite for the excitement of the criminal underworld. Across Britain, huge numbers of people had migrated to towns and cities. This crowding together of strangers led to feelings of distrust and insecurity. And just as today, public fears were stoked with sensational reports of the most lurid crimes. The Victorians began to feel that they were being swamped by a crime wave. There seemed to be an increase in lawlessness in towns and cities right across the country. Crime was becoming a political issue and action was needed. In 1829, Sir Robert Peel introduced bobbies or peelers to London, and in 1839 the Birmingham force appeared. But it wasn't until 1856 that the government decided that every town in the country should have its own police force. All too often they weren't. For some notorious criminals, it was all too easy to escape the long arm of the law. In 1888, these streets in London's East End were the hunting ground of one of Britain's most notorious criminals, the fearsome Leather Apron, more commonly known as Jack the Ripper. His crimes were cold and calculated. He cut the throats of 5 women, all of whom had fallen into disrepute. The first 2 and the last 2 had their bodies horribly mutilated, but on the 3rd occasion he was almost caught in the act. He escaped, and within the hour he killed his 4th victim. The Victorians were already terrified about crime, and these murders really touched a raw nerve. The Queen wrote to the Home Secretary expressing her severe concern, and the people were desperate to find out about the murders. The newspapers were only too happy to print all the salacious details because their circulation was going up. In fact, some people said that journalists planted false evidence just to keep the story on the boil. The police came in for a lot of criticism for their handling of the case. They put out extra patrols and stakeouts in the streets, and they tried entirely new techniques. They got bloodhounds in. It was the first time they'd ever been used to try and track down the criminal. And while the bloodhounds were in London, there was no murder, and the police decided they were too expensive to feed and sent them home. Come on, dogs. And then the Ripper started again. There were plenty of suspects, but the Ripper was never caught. In a murder investigation today, the police would unleash a whole battery of techniques that were simply unavailable to the Victorians. Nevertheless, the Victorians were the fathers of forensic science.